Hello and welcome to episode number 2 of the Lewiston Tribune podcast. I'm your host, online editor Trevin Pixley, and joined with me for a second straight episode is the city editor, Matt Baney. Baney, how you doing, man?
Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here with you and excited for this episode ahead. There's a lot of history in this room, and I said last time that you were the big cheese, the head honcho. I really hyped you up, gave you a real exciting intro, but today we actually have the big cheese, the head honcho of the Lewiston Tribune. We got Butch Alford. Butch, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you, Trevin. It's an honor to be in the presence of number 2 podcast. That's almost historic.
Yeah, almost historic. And speaking of historic, this building is super historic. This newspaper, super historic. And the Lewiston Tribune is about to turn 132 on Sunday. And Butch, obviously, the family, you've been around for a lot of the history, just kind of break down what it means to you to see, the success that the Tribune has had over the years.
Well, of course, it means a lot in many ways. The Tribune has been my life, I suppose. It's gone by awfully quickly, but I will have been here in January 64 years. So I think of this, Trevin, this building at 505 Capitol Street, I think of this as the new Tribune building. That shows when you've been around, fortunately, as long as I have, that this building is not old. It's not majestic in that way. It's the new Tribune. I was here, just finished moving in when I got here in 1961, out of college and out of the U.S. Army, Armor Corps.
Butch, if you can, give us your breakdown of September 29th, 1892. How did this thing get started from what you know, from what you've been told? You weren't there September 29th, 1892, but your family was.
They certainly were. I think it's a fascinating story because it involves a grandfather and great uncle. Let me put it this way. It's probably a pretty darn typical of 100-plus-year-old businesses in Lewiston, Clarkston, and the region that we serve, the Palouse, the Canvas Prairie, and out through Garfield County and all that. If I were to break it down quickly, I'd say there were 2 young men by the name of Alford. My grandfather, Eugene Alford, who died in 1946, and my great uncle and namesake, Albert Alford, who passed away in 1926. They were young Texans. They both went to college in Lexington, Virginia, at a private school called Washington and Lee University in Lexington. A beautiful campus. I almost went to school there. I even got accepted, Matt, which means they have very high protocols. Albert remained in, once he graduated, he went to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch as a reporter. He majored in journalism. Eugene was younger, and when he finished his journalism degree program at Washington and Lee, the 2 of them had plans, and that was to start a weekly newspaper, somewhere in the Northwest. And I can only imagine that they didn't want to go back to Texas and the hard-scrabble farm they grew up on. So they took off. They met in Portland, Oregon, and they went to a commercial establishment that sold press equipment to start a newspaper. They pooled all the money they had, and I don't know how much that was, but it wasn't much then, and it would be even less now, and bought a Washington hand feed newspaper press. They bought type, movable type. They bought all the equipment they needed to start a newspaper. And after they had made that decision and purchased, I think the Mr. Phillips, the fellow who was selling to them at the one-turn shop, probably was aghast when they said to him, now where would you go start this newspaper? If you were a couple young fellows like we are, the Alford boys, where would you go? And he finally, after pondering the question, said, I'd go to either of two cities. One, Astoria, Oregon, or second, Lewiston, Idaho. And they said, well, why would you go to Astoria? And he replied that it was a growing metropolis, expected to be the largest city in Oregon. It had more population at that time than upstream Portland, and had a thriving seafood industry. It had transportation being on the water. He said that's why I would consider Astoria a fine place. They said, how about Lewiston, Idaho? And he said, well, Lewiston, Idaho is farther away from here, but I would consider Lewiston because the Nez Perce Indian lands are soon going to be let go by the government, confiscated Nez Perce lands, and that's going to open up all sorts of agriculture opportunities for homesteaders and folks that want to do that. And agriculture, of course, is a key industry. Not only that, but it's on water. You can stern wheelers run up the Columbia River and the Snake River, and that's as far as they go, is Lewiston, Idaho. But in addition to that, the railroads are fighting to get to their spur lines to Lewiston. So it's got terrific water navigation. It's got transportation in the future, the soon future of railroads, and it's going to have a swarm of people developing agriculture in the area. Well, that sold them on Lewiston, Idaho. So,
if I can ask for just Butch, what do you think? Why did they? I mean, both sounded like good options. Why do you think what was it about the Lewiston option that appealed to them?
Well, who knows? We can imagine. I think the portrayal by the salesman sold them that Lewiston. Transportation was imminent, important in its day. Agriculture, the economy, that held forth. I think maybe they thought that agriculture had a better future than fishing did, commercial fishing.
That's it's maybe you've thought of that. It's interesting that it almost that kind of flip of a coin decision they make. Think of all that has led to. I mean, your life. Our lives, I mean, it all would have been different if the Alford boys had said, well, that Astoria sounds good.
Isn't that true? Yeah. That's very true.
Have you heard anything about just kind of the humble beginnings of when the Lewiston Tribune began, when they're first starting out, putting out the weekly paper, how was that? How were some of the struggles? Was it successful? How did that kind of begin?
Well, in today's life of newspapers, we think that times are more challenging than ever. They are. In a way, they are. They're definitely challenging. The Tribune and our sister newspaper, the Moscow Pullman Daily News, are two of, 84, 85 privately held, family-owned, and in our case, employee-owned newspapers left in the entire United States. But think of the challenge at that time. The two boys landed in Lewiston on today's Snake River Avenue, at what today is Kiwanis Park. That's where the stern wheelers landed in that day. That's where they mortgaged. And they would talk about, and Eugene would talk about how they arranged for a delivery of the press and equipment to be held and then to be taken to a location to be determined. And those two boys, they're in their 20s, and all they had was $100, which at that time was more than $100 today, granted. But they had very little money. He described how they walked down today's Snake River Avenue, and they passed, for example, the future site, 1926 or so, of the Hotel Lewis Clark, and they walked on down to what was 5th and Montgomery Streets, today 5th and Main Streets, and on that left corner where there's now a parking lot, the beautiful mural, was the Raymond House Hotel. And they spent part of their $100 remaining by getting a room in the boarding house, the Raymond Hotel, in later years, now knocked down, of course. So just think, they had to find a place to put the equipment, and they did that in Grostine Hall, a parking lot by the present Hotel Lewis Clark, and they got in the town opera house. They rented quarters, and that's where they put all their equipment. About a month later, after they had surveyed the town and checked it out and drank whiskey and smoked cigars with fellow young entrepreneurs in this town of Lewiston, which had in those days was down to a population of 750. It had considerably more population than that during the gold rush days at Orofino and Pierce City. But anyway, the stories are pretty accurate, I think, that Albert was the journalist. He was the writer. He wrote well. He wrote in the style of the day, which today we would find a bit cumbersome, but he was a colorful writer and delved in politics a little bit later, was Speaker of the House in the Idaho legislature. And Eugene, meantime, was the business guy, and he sold the advertising. He rode his bicycle around town to collect payments due for advertising, and he sold circulation, sold subscriptions, and all that sort of thing. And I believe it. I can see him on a bicycle because I never saw him drive a car. Now, he died in 1946, so I was 7, 8 years old, but I never saw him drive. His wife, my grandmother Alice, who we called Granby, drove him all over town. He would get in the back seat of the car, and they had Cadillacs in the years I'm familiar with, and he had a cane, and he had a cigar in his mouth, usually not lit, and he would get in the back seat of the car like his wife, my grandmother Granby, would drive him. They looked like he was being picked up by a chauffeur. I got quite a kick out of it. Never saw him drive. But anyway, you can imagine the young newspaper man and the guy on the bicycle going around trying to get enough business to keep the doors open and a handful of employees employed. And one thing that they didn't tell him in Portland was that there's an established newspaper in town already here called the Lewiston Teller. And Matt, that might have changed their mind had they known that. I don't know that there was not a newspaper in Astoria, but there was one in Lewiston that was well set and secure. And it brings up a date that I think is important, and that's the date of 1898, the Spanish-American War, which is when they went daily instead of, at that time, twice a week. They had grown from weekly to twice a week. And that was a turning point. I think one of the most interesting years in the 130 some years of Tribune history.
So and they went daily because the public was clamoring for news of the war.
Yeah, the militia of Lewiston, Grangeville, Orofino, Moscow, what we think of as today's National Guard, had been called up into the Spanish-American War. And you can imagine that if you lived in Lewiston at the time or Clarkston at the time, that you wanted to know what's going on with our boys in the Spanish-American War. And the two brothers managed to get the news of the war from being in the Associated Press. And that's an interesting story. The Spokane newspaper was the Spokesman Review. And William Coles, the senior, was the publisher of the Spokesman Review. And the Alford boys petitioned the Associated Press for membership. It's a news collective across the United States in those days and the world to get the news of the Spanish-American War. And they had a rule in those days of the Associated Press that if one member blackballed another prospective member, that prospective member was turned down from membership in the collective called the Associated Press. So the Alford boys got turned down. They repetitioned, and they got turned down, and they got a communication from Mr. Coles in Spokane. Boys, I like you very much. You're fine young men, and we're glad to have you in the Inland Empire. However, we don't need any more newspapers around in the Spokesman Review circulation area, so that's why I've blackballed you, and that will continue. So take a hike. And so the Alford boys had a return gambit on that. They went to Spokane, and they went to a bar across the street from the Spokesman Review building, same location as it is today. And when the shift would end with the editors and reporters, they would amble over to the saloon at midnight or 1 or 2 in the morning, and well, not probably 2, but midnight for sure. And they had enough money in their pockets that they bought drinks for the Spokane editors. And in turn, you can imagine this. In turn, the editors said, "They are a fine young men, those Alfords from Lewiston," and they got an offer. They said, "We'll pay you a stipend weekly in hard cash if you will simply take the carbon copies of the Associated Press and run them over to a block away to the telegraph office, and they will have been prepaid to send coverage of the Spanish-American War and other national top news of the day. We'll telegraph it to the Tribune for you." And the boys, after several invitations of libations in Spokane, said, "Sure, we'd be glad to help you. You're good young men." And so Mr. Coles, after a period of months, saw that this Lewiston Tribune newspaper, which had turned daily to publish news of interest on the boys in the war, he said, I don't know how the heck you're getting that news from the Associated Press. It's not right, it's not legal, but you're getting it, and I'll lift my embargo on the Associated Press, and at least you'll be paying your way instead of getting this free service. And the embargo was lifted, and the hanging in our former Red Room in the Tribune is the original certificate framed of the Associated Press accepting the Lewiston Tribune. So that was 1898 was I think in many ways a more important year than 2024.
That's an awesome story. The Lewiston Teller you were mentioning, what happened to that newspaper?
Well, after the boys went daily, the teller went daily in response. But they were laid out of the starting blocks, and I think that the Alford boys and the Tribune were feisty and quick, and the Lewiston Teller just simply lost ground. And some 10 years later, they folded.
Gotcha.
After the original Alfords, the next generation was your dad,
Yes.
Bud Alford.
Yes, A.L. Alford.
And A.L. Bud Alford, do you know, Butch, was he planning to go into the family business all along, or did he fall into it? How was it that he ended up succeeding them?
Well, I'll tell you how, and it's interesting. He was at Washington. He went to the University of Idaho for 2 years. Then he transferred to Washington Lee University. His dad and uncle said, you should do both. You've been to Idaho, now go to Washington Lee, a fine institution. And so we did. And in 1926, something like April, May of that year, Albert Alford died. And he was a bachelor. So there, the family story was, if you want longevity in life, you better get married, because Albert didn't, and you know what happened to him at a premature age. Neither that or too much whiskey and too many cigars. Anyway, he passed away, and Eugene, who was the father of Bud, my dad, he got a telegram at Washington Lee in Lexington, Virginia, and it said, basically, Albert has died, Albert has popped the cork, take the first train home. And so we did, and he didn't ever get his diploma from Washington and Lee, because it was like 1 month short of graduation. He should have petitioned, they probably would have given it to him. Yeah. So he came back immediately as a young man in early 20s. I would say, for sake of this, probably 21, was thrown into the managing editor chair at the Tribune. That's how he got drafted. Let's put it that way. But it wasn't drafted like today's professional sports. No. It didn't come with $1 million package.
Well, then the next generation was you, and as you know, you were definitely born into it, and here you were your whole life. But did you ever have thoughts of doing something other than working at the Lewiston Tribune?
Well, I had thoughts of something other than the Tribune, but I had journalism in my blood, so to speak, and I came back in 1961 as a reporter, and my first job was one I was disappointed in, but I enjoyed very much, and I just had a different mindset that I thought I'd cover things like city councils and elections and campaigns and that sort of thing. And I was informed when I was hired that at $100 a week, which was acceptable to me, so that I would be have my own office in Clarkston. I would be the Clarkston Asotin County reporter. And the only question I had was, is that a forever position, or is that possible after a couple of years to maybe move up to something else? So I became the Clarkston and Asotin County reporter, and that's in the days when we had an Asotin Clarkston page within the newspaper. They had their own page, and so it was pretty good. It was a good experience because he covered everything from city council to crime and courts and everything in between, and all the folks that lived to be 100 years old, the birthday story, much like today. So that's what I did. And I moved on from that to a lot of desks in the newsroom, city council, county commission, some politics, you name it, courts and crime. And finally, after a few years, I got drafted into, for 1 year, the circulation department. That might have been the most challenging in some ways, and definitely the year that seemed like 2 years instead of one, because it wasn't covering news, which is what I liked. I filled in as acting managing editor when Bill Johnston took a leave of absence to go to the University of Washington as a trial or acting professor. Then when he came back, of course, I got booted out of that position. That was fun. But anyway, what happened, we got into a third generation of publishers, editors, by Dad dying unexpectedly of aneurysm from a fall. So that happened in, 1968. All of a sudden, at the age of 29, was thrust into the editor-publisher position and served a quick 40 years and then semi-retired some 15 years ago.
And now we're on to the fourth generation.
We are.
And
we are.
Your son,
I think we're fortunate to have survived the third publisher. I can speak highly of numbers 1, 2, and 4.
Yeah. Well, take me through when you first got into that publisher role. What was that like, and what was your first year as a publisher like?
Well, the first year went so quickly. I can recall that I would come down at be on the job at 6 in the morning, and I would basically read the paper at that time. Delivery of the Tribune in those days was no later than 7 in the morning, if you can imagine that. So I didn't have the paper at home yet. So I would come down at 6 in the morning. I would mark the newspaper as the editor role and would write my version of a critique of the day's newspaper and leave it on the desk of the managing editor, who at that time was, let's see, who was managing editor then? Charlie Boren, I believe. And then I would go on through the rest of the day with the normal routines of communicating and working with advertising and production and news, etc. But it was the first year was a real trial. I thought I did okay, and I thought I had an aura of some level of confidence, and it was taken aback by a young fellow just a little older than me, named Bill Hall, who was our opinion page editor. And he came to the Tribune, I believe, in '64. So he was about 2 years into his time-honored work and career, and ended up retiring here, of course. When Bill one night said that he wouldn't have given odds that I would last in the job. I thank BH for that vote of confidence. I thought I was doing pretty well. He thought I was pretty damn shaky.
Well, to see your son succeed you as editor and publisher, when you had children, certainly I'm assuming that you must have had that thought that one of your kids might be the one to take over for you. And anyway, I assume it must have been nice to see that you had a kid who was willing to step up and take that role.
Well, yeah, and I and you, Trevin, I think we're in the debt that Nathan came to the Tribune. He took journalism at the University of Idaho, and he was a good, sharp student. The two other sons, Grid, who's at the Tribune now, working in customer service and circulation. He didn't have the attitude at that time of full-time work, and I've always thought at the Tribune that we'll never have a publisher who hasn't had experience in news. We're not a newspaper that hires a sharp advertising genius to be publisher. That may be an unfair way to look at things, but we're a newspaper. And Nathan graduated from the University of Idaho in journalism, and he then went to ended up in Boise with a friend, and they started a coffee business, a drive-through coffee business, espresso stand. Nice one, stick built and all that sort of thing. And their idea was to, within a handful of years, to incorporate to where they had a dozen or 2 dozen drive-through coffee businesses in the western United States. Well, after a couple of years, Nathan told me that he was getting tired of the coffee business. They hadn't expanded. They were busy working the coffee stand, and he thought that his partner was ready to sell also. He thought that John Benninger, he thought that the Boise was too darn many people to suit him and population and all that. So he and Nathan, for different reasons, came to the conclusion they'd sell. Java Detour was the name of the business, very successful. And anyway, Nathan decided he would go on to law school, and we encouraged that and helped him do that. So he graduated in 3 years from Gonzaga University, and he passed the bar in Idaho, first attempt, and that's no small thing. And it was in the Christmas period of his final year, senior year of college, and it was when I was making an attempt to buy back the newspapers, and I hit him up during that time over a couple of scotches, and I said, Nathan, anyone can plant a shingle and say I'm practicing law, but only a chosen few can go into journalism. And he ended up with that great sales job. He ended up coming to the newspapers first. That he had done summer work at the Tribune rather than do legal duties during the summers, as many did. And I encouraged him in that, saying, it'd be a rarity among lawyers to be able to write well and concisely and accurately. And so he had a taste of reporting, had liked it. Then he went on to started at the Daily News, and from there, being publisher there, came back to the Tribune. So anyway, that's a quick history.
We should probably also ask you about, there was a stretch where the Tribune wasn't entirely locally owned.
That's for sure.
Tell us how that all played out.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Interesting to me. Let me see if it's of interest to you. In 1979, the 2 other branches of the Alford family, there were the Alfords, myself and my brother, who had died in an accident, and the Hamlins and the Matlocks. Those were descendants of the Tribune, original owners, E.L. and Mrs. Alford. And the 2 other branches decided that they wanted to make more money, quite honestly, than the newspaper provided. And so I met with them, and we talked about how to sell a newspaper. And they were very accommodating. I was up front with them, and I said, I don't want to sell the newspaper, but let's list the newspaper for sale, and you'd be eligible to sell 2/3 of the stock in the Tribune. And that was the Tribune and the Idahonian. at Moscow, predecessor to the Daily News. And I said, while you're doing that, I will network with my newspaper friends and will talk to ownership of family-owned newspapers and see if they want to buy in. And basically, I said, here's what I think would happen. I'll help you all the way I can, and I did. Sell to a top price from another newspaper organization, probably a chain organization, and if I enter the scene at the last minute with an alternative that meets that price, would you allow the sale to go to my friendly partner newspaper, family ownership? And they said yes. And so we had a meeting down in the Red Room of the board of directors. I was president of the corporation, and they had that afternoon we're going to have Howard Publications based in Twin Falls. That was the successful bidder of all the chains that the bid for 2/3 of the stock, or potentially 100% of the stock. And they were going to fly in that afternoon on the company plane. And I said, I have had expression of interest from 3 families, and the one that I would offer that will meet that price is Kearns Tribune Corporation out of Salt Lake City, owners of the Salt Lake Tribune. Long story short, they knew Jack Galaban, the president of that Kearns Tribune Corporation, and everybody liked Jack, and they said fine. It's very embarrassing to tell Howard Publications that we are the sale is off. I said, well, I could make that phone call from you. I wouldn't be embarrassed at all. I know the Howards well. No, they said, we'll call them. So they did. They called. They went to an adjoining office. They called the Howards and said, leave the plane on the ground. And I called Salt Lake and I said, we're going to be partners. Mm-hmm. That's how it came about.
And that you remained the publisher and a third owner during that phase of the company.
Right.
And then in the late 90s, you mounted an effort to buy the paper back, right?
Yeah, I did. And that's kind of circumvents a little bit. Salt Lake Tribune sold its stock, and I was on their board. Sold the stock to a cable television outfit called TCI. The publisher of the newspaper, the Salt Lake Tribune, Jack Galaban, and the editor, Jerry O'Brien, who I used to work for in a couple summers at when he was the AP manager in Spokane. They were on the board of Kearns Tribune. So they had this kind of a gambit, really, where the Kearns Tribune would buy the Kearns Tribune would sell to TCI, and a short time later, like they thought 2 years, maybe 3 years, they would buy it back, and that would allow the stockholders of the Kearns Tribune, which were multiple, and family and some ESOP ownership, they would be able to get their money out of it, and those who were interested could buy back the newspaper. And I signed up to help buy back the newspaper, the Salt Lake Tribune, and the Lewiston Tribune, and our holdings at the time. Anyway, the Kearns Tribune repurchase was not successful. TCI decided that they would hold it longer and put it on the market rather than this friendly sellback to Kearns Tribune former board members. So anyway, I went to TCI and I said, hey, look, you got under this Kearns Tribune, you've got a noteworthy newspaper, Pulitzer Prize winning Salt Lake Tribune. But you've also got some other newspapers. You've got the little newspaper in Shopper in Sparks, Nevada, outside of Reno. And you've got the weekly newspaper in Colfax, Washington, called the Whitman County Gazette. And you've got this newspaper by the name of the Idahonian in Moscow. And you've got this Lewiston Tribune, 2 dailies, 2 weeklies. I said, they're not of interest to you. They don't make much money for you. Wouldn't it be smart if you split those out and sold them to me, and instead of then whatever you do with the Salt Lake Tribune, the Big Papa, it makes it a much clearer cut, easier to sell. They said, well, that makes a lot of sense. We'll do that. I said, great, let's establish a price. They said, no, we will put it on the market to sell it. And so we went through an interesting year of the newspapers that I suggested be a package, be sold, and had the chain newspapers all throughout the country bidding on these newspapers. And it was right just before Christmas in 1997 that I called the president of TCI and I said, look, I have given you my final bid, and why don't you call off the goddamn dogs? That's more money than you ever thought you'd get for all these little newspapers, and let's button it up. And he said, I think you're right. So the deal was struck, and it was to close on, and I'd gone to Chicago to meet with their folks and Denver to meet with their folks. And finally, we struck a deal, and it was going to be a sale on effective April 1, 1998. And I said, that's got bad mojo. April 1, April Fool's Day. Could we change it to the end of March? And they said, oh, sure. We don't want bad mojo. So anyway, purchased those newspapers back, and TPC Holdings Incorporated was the official name that we chose, and the rest is the Tribune continues on, and the Daily News, the former Idahonian, continues on. We sold Colfax to the publisher there, recognizing that a good weekly newspaper should be owned by the community, not by this outfit down in Lewiston. And the same was basically true with Sparks, Nevada.
132 years of the Lewiston Tribune, Butch. Is there anything here so far in this 43-minute now podcast? I feel like I could listen to you talk forever, Butch. You are a great storyteller. Yeah. I love listening to you talk, but is there anything else that you want to add just on your run here or the Tribune as a whole?
Nothing that would do anything except continue past the time allotted. I apologize for the length.
I only
you two asked such fine questions. How could I not continue on?
I only mentioned the length because of how time flies when you're having fun. That's what they say.
That's true.
I gotta ask one more question. You've been here for 60 some years of
63 years.
Is it way different now than it was 63 years ago, or does it feel kind of like the same deal? I mean, the work that we do here.
The mission is the same, and that's what it's all about. The mission is to provide accurate, fair news report of the day, and to offer a yeasty opinion page, and we've managed to do both those things, and try to make a profit so that we can pay almost fair wages to all the folks that are part of the team. So that's the same. That's the same. The characteristics are different. Hot metal presses, and we had 20 linotype machines in the old composing room that now is cut up into different things. All that has changed, and certainly the business operation of the newspaper has changed with the times. Where it never occurred to me that I could get up at 2 a.m. and take a look at the newspaper, the Lewiston Tribune or the Moscow Pullman Daily News, online on a computer. Yeah. So that's all changed. But the mission of the newspaper remains the same.
Thank you, Butch, for your time and for my livelihood. Thank you for employing me here and giving me a job and sending me a birthday card every birthday. That's something Butch does. He'll send it in the mail. It's one of the nicest things. My grandma doesn't even send me a birthday card anymore, Baney, but I can always count on one from Butch.
Well, your grandmother probably has a reason.
Yeah. Any final words before we send this one out of here?
Oh no, it's Trevin said it. It's great to hear Butch's stories. In fact, I think I was telling somebody that we were going to have you on the podcast, and I said, if we have a week where we just can't think of anything else to talk about, we'll just have Butch come and say, Butch, tell us about the old days, and we'll hear some of those stories.
He'll fill up a half hour or more. Thank you, Trevin. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you, Butch. And thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure to check everything out on social media like the Lewiston Tribune on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Same thing with the Moscow Pullman Daily News on all the social medias. And if you're listening to this on the Tribune website, it is also on YouTube. And the YouTube channel is just the Lewiston Tribune. And if you're already listening to it on YouTube, then fantastic. You already found it. Thank you guys for tuning in.